Many people have asked me where the seed scale method came from. And it's a long, long history. People have been trying to find ways to improve their lives, and they've been willing to take significant risks and work very hard in order to improve their communities. And they've been willing to do this for thousands of years. Certainly the earliest attempts at this were revolutions, where people worked and came together to overthrow oppressive leaders or to try to start over again. And revolutions typically have disappointed the people who led them, because after the great gift of lives and hard work, often just a new repression comes in. So people came at the process in a different way. They had religious revivals and said the hope and the new birth and the new opportunity has to come from inside us, and that from outside someplace divine ideas will come. And sometimes they worked. But very often also, after the great hope, there was not that much concrete improvements in the practical issues of health and wealth and food security. Religion can do a lot, but it doesn't really improve the food security and the health and what these other aspects of life that are part of life. So the search has gone on, and many other approaches have been tried. And Seed Scale is trying to bring together all of these, the best from every one. It's trying to grow from the values that people hold dear and close in their religions. It's trying to take advantage of the risks that people are making in revolutionary movements. And especially, it is taking advantage of some of the systematic learning that has happened for the last 100 years. And that systematic learning has many roots, but two of them are worth noting. One of them is inspirational local leaders, people like Jimmy Yen in China in the early 20th century, who started the mass education movement, which led to health changes, what we came to call barefoot doctors, and educational programs such as the peasant scholars. But also working alongside were people who were driving their change from religious reasons, missionaries all over the world, in the United States, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, people who used their religion to try to branch out and make larger social change. But then after World War II, these scattered efforts became supported by governments. And a whole new era of what we now call intentional international development began. New institutions were formed. The foundations that had been active beforehand, like Rockefeller and Carnegie and the Tata Foundation in India, those foundations used their knowledge and experience to inform the government programs. So the World Bank got started. The Agriculture FAO organization got started, UNICEF got started, and a variety of what are now big nonprofits, like the International Rescue Committee. The thought at first was that money could make a difference. And so vast sums of money were spent and sent to other countries. And certainly with programs like the Marshall Plan in Europe, they made a big difference. And so through the 1950s and 1960s, this international aid and assistance movement started to grow. And by the 1960s, it moved to a capacity building emphasis, where people were being educated, and lots of money and educational institutions got into developing scholarships for those people who could learn the skills and gather the knowledge. And in parallel to that, interventions began to address crises. There were famines in the 1950s and 1960s, and so the Green Revolution was started to address that crisis. There were epidemics, And so malaria eradication began. There was growing insurgencies of revolutions, and so intentional peacekeeping efforts began. All these crisis interventions then started to come to a new understanding by the 1970s, which was that we had to integrate solutions. That it wasn't just food security, it wasn't just epidemics, and even within each of these fields, an integrative approach was needed, so that with the Green Revolution, it wasn't just giving seeds or technology or fertilizer or irrigation. It was bringing all those parts together. And with improving people's health, it wasn't just immunizations or better nutrition or educating mothers. It was bringing all those parts together in what became known as the child survival revolution. Integration started to happen in the 1970s as we brought pieces together. And then in the 1980s, people said, oh, this integration work is so difficult. Let's see if there's some sort of magic solution, some sort of silver bullet, so that if we do that, a whole host of radiating other things will come from it. And so the basic needs approach got started to develop the key needs that people would need to take off. Livelihood programs got started with ideas like microfinance and the Grameen Bank getting started to try to bring money in the hands of the poor. And then techniques began to be developed, like participatory rural appraisals, PRAs, and appreciative inquiry, and asset-based community development, ABCD. These were efforts to get a silver bullet to solve the problem. But people realized that in order to have a silver bullet address the problem, you needed a gun to shoot it. And you needed the skill to be able to aim the gun. And so at that point, really, the synthesis started to come together, and I was privileged to be part of that synthesis that brought out the seed scale method. There was a key understanding that happened at that time, which is that the world is not separated into the haves and the have-nots. It's not separated into the developed and the underdeveloped, but it's a continuum. And in every community, there are people who are better off and less well off. And the people who are better off actually can be helpful in helping those who are less well off. And that the understanding by the early 1990s was we are all developing. And that in working together in a mutual developing process, we all advance. And so in 1992, the executive director of UNICEF, Jim Grant, gave a charge to my father and me to try to pull some of these strands together. Because Jim Grant, who was the executive director of UNICEF, had seen change happen in China in the 1930s and 40s through the work of his father and the work of Jimmy Yen and the other people who were involved in setting up a social movement in China, which Mao Zedong then appropriated and used as for his political movement. But Jim Grant's instructions were very interesting. He said, it does not matter how much money I put into a project. I can put millions, I can put hundreds of millions. The results are unpredictable. It does not even make the critical difference to put the best people in the world on a project, because the best people wrestle with the problem, but reliable results don't come at the other end. What is it that happens in the mysterious black box of society moving through its various challenges and its daily demands? What is it that happens in that process that sometimes bursts open with optimism and success, and a takeoff happens? The society moves from one state to another more cohesive, benefiting of all opportunities. And so we started task forces, we had meetings, we read the literature, we looked at opportunities that had been, by that point, demonstrated of integrated, community-based, bottom-up social change. And it became very clear that there is a process by which people can grow bottom-up change, just like there is a process which they can grow better food security, bottom up from the fields. And so the 7 tasks of Seed Scale were identified from the experience of others. The idea of coming together into a committee to lead, the idea of building from seeds that really work in your community, the idea of getting an education, the idea of getting data and building from evidence rather than power and opinions, the idea of creating a systematic work plan that works in a linear way, like a blueprint, to tell you what to do next, but that the blueprint is created by the people in the community themselves. And then the idea of doing it over again and over again, each time making it better, never trying to get it right, but just trying to get it better. Those 7 tasks then became a means for communities to take action. But once they started that change, then the question became how to monitor and guide that change. And so the 5 criteria were developed based on looking and working with experts around the world, because it's very clear when you go into the field with an expert, they can tell within a few hours of walking into the community what its health situation is, or what its food security situation is, or the levels of conflict. Somebody else who's not an expert can't make those distinctions very quickly. But an expert knows exactly what to look for. And so we said, let us find from the experts the key indicators so we learn what to look for in every community. The key indicators will differ community to community. But the experts can tell us what to look for, and then we, simple people in a community, can do and use those key indicators to monitor social change. And if they're real numbers, not something like, oh, this is a more peaceful place, oh, this is a more healthier place. No, we want a number to show why health is better, for instance, child mortality. Or we want a number to show why the environment is better, for instance, the advent of a new bird that represents a natural balance. If we have numbers, we can count those numbers. Children can count that numbers. And so people are monitoring their change. And that's what the 5 criteria do. But then the circle comes in full circle. And we go back to the understanding that behind all of this are values. This is the religious insight. So we have to be looking and grounding all of these things in the values and principles that belong to every community. And they're different place to place. Not even in one country do those values remain the same. And they have to be respected. And they are the foundation out of which the 7 tasks are implemented and the 5 principles. But in those values, there are some common threads and some common principles that can build up from those, and those we call the 4 principles. This evolutionary process is very different from the idea of a revolution that is going to turn and overthrow the system. This evolution is taking seeds. It is taking strength that is in the community, and it is creating, in fact, a new hope and a new opportunity for the future that is not traumatic like a revolution, but that evolves in an emerging way from the experience and the resources and the energy of the people themselves working in partnership with themselves and with their government and with their businesses and with friends all over the world. Because now we are in a one-world situation. With the internet, it's a one information world. With the global economy, it's a one economic world of interdependencies. And with the one planet that we are on, we're all riding forward to the future together. So this is what we call in Seed Scale a socio-econo-info biosphere. And by looking at the whole experience together, we can evolve a better future. Thanks.